So we have three things on our agenda today. The first thing is a lot of you guys finished that mid-semester survey that I put out. I don't do it every semester. I haven't done it in a while. So I just like to share those results with you all so that you kind of know where you're at, what your classmates are thinking in terms of the class. So I'll give a little presentation on that. And then the next thing is, how many of you guys enjoyed maybe that article review that I had you do? Those of you who did it. Some people find that helpful, and especially I want you to be able to use the things that you learn outside of this class, whether that be actually doing research or being a consumer of research, and maybe you're having to read about it. So I brought some articles that are specific to repeated measures. And we'll get in small groups and read through some of those articles and do article reviews for repeated measures studies. And then the last thing is, in your bright space, you have just an additional practice, repeated measures worksheet. And so I'm going to give you some class time to do that. Again, just to make sure, last class period, repeated measures, we put a lot of material in a short amount of time, and now haven't seen you in 2 weeks. So I just want to be here to support you as you kind of finish out, make sure that you understood repeated measures and things like that. So the first thing that I want to just briefly share with you is the result of the mid-semester survey. So overall, I feel like we're doing pretty good, and I gave the same survey face-to-face and online, so it's kind of fun to compare the two because they get the same exact lecture that you all do. I just post it up to them on Tuesdays after class. And so the results were pretty similar. I'm glad that most people like that the expectations of the course are clear, but there were some comments about unclear expectations, specifically about the project. So you might have seen up in the project content of Brightspace, because you do have project number 2, I put up an example from one of your classmates this semester. I modified it just slightly, but if you want an example of, I had trouble fitting it into the link that it was supposed to be, or different things like that, you'll find an example in there just for your reference in case you wanted that. There were some disagreeing on a few things, which I tend to expect, but for the most part, I felt like overall the pace was okay. I'm glad that you, from the most part, think that it's organized. These are some other things. Materials are a good length for most of you. I know some people, you get way bogged down, and that was one of the things, is just time management for the class that you struggle with, which is understandable because that's part of graduate school. But some people do think that they are too long or too short. And so if you're kind of in one of those boats where you think, I'm spending way too much time on this, maybe you should come see me. Maybe you run through it quickly one time, as quick as you can. And then you come and you talk to me about it so that you use that time a little bit more efficiently during office hours. And the other one about how well materials in the exam align with kind of your expectations or the content of the course. And for the most part, there's some continuity across, which is helpful. So what do you love and what do you not dislike? Usually there's at least one comment that says love is a strong word for this course. I didn't get that one this time. But overall, it was pretty good. I felt like so far, just with the one-way ANOVA, I like that you're excited about learning. Like some of you said, I actually understand this stuff and I've never done that before. And so that's really good from my perspective because that's what's most important. Somebody said, one of the hardest things about this class is that it's not just, plug and chug. I give you information, you spit it back out on the homework, but you have to actually understand it and use some deeper level thinkings to apply it to a new situation. And the examples and practice and things like that, overall, I felt like there was a good, favorable attitude towards the class. There's always some dislikes. Some people don't really like the due dates on Mondays. I used to have them on the weekends, and I got a lot more dislikes about a weekend thing. So at least the weekend got away from you. You have Monday to catch up. I know it makes for, a manic Monday, but that's typical. Let me see. Math, some people aren't just a fan of math, and this class does have a little bit of math, but I like to think it's a balance of math and application. I know that 3 hours sitting in this class is a long time. The online class does have the benefit that they can watch it in little chunks, but sometimes that maybe is what you have to do. You just sit through here, and afterwards you take some time and chunk it out and go at your own pace, which is another reason that I hope that the videos are helpful. And so then the last slide is what's helping you learn. A lot of people say they watch the videos, and a few people said they watch it on YouTube. You can listen to it faster. And so maybe you just needed to get to the key pieces. So know that you can do that. That option is available to you. But I was glad to see people mentioning the exercise and the extra practice, because I don't talk a lot about that in class, but I'm glad to know that it does help those who need it, and those who you don't need it, it doesn't waste your time. What's making learning difficult? So some things about the videos, whether you're in class or you're watching the videos at home, there were quite a few responses on when I ask a question. Usually there's 1 or 2 students that know the answers right away. And it doesn't allow other people the time to think for themselves. And I get that. So I'm going to try to, pause that, to ask a question and say pause, and give everybody some time to think about that before one person answers. And so you can help me out on that. If you say, I need some more time to think, just remind me, because that doesn't bother me at all. It is easy to get behind in this class. You've seen that. And today is a little bit, we're coming out of spring break. We want to finish strong, so we're easing into it. But from here, next week especially, there's going to be new content every week until the end. So just know that the next few weeks are going to be pretty heavy as we finish out. So I think overall that was kind of the gist. I hope that summarizes kind of everybody's perspective, some positive, some negative, but overall, I was happy with the feedback, and if there's anything else that you care to share about it, do let me know. So at this point, there are in the additional resources, and I just put it back in week 9. I know we're in week 10, but I just put it with all the repeated measure stuff so it wouldn't be split up. So if you go to the very bottom of that, there's another article review document. You don't have to download it, but then there are some additional articles, but I've printed them off. I like hard copies when I'm reading. So if you would, let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Let's get in groups of 3, at most 4, but I would prefer 3. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. So I have 3 articles that I'm going to pass out, but every group is not going to do all 3. I'm going to give every group 2 articles, so we'll kind of double up on some of them. And then I will give everybody the document for you to fill out, 1 for each article. And so for each group, you are going to turn it in. This one's not for grade or bonus or anything like that. So here we go. You guys can get this one. And I'll bring your articles back to you.
They took you already?
Yeah. Thank you. Oh, no, I do not. I didn't know how that. My mom knows very well, and I really don't.
Well, it's in my wheelhouse.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll just read all this for you, I guess.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
And she said it's not for grades, it's just for practice, to use therapeutic medication.
I'll choose between yours.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna just kind of give you time. I'll walk around, talk about them, and then maybe try to think about no more than 10 minutes on each of them. So maybe 20 minutes, we'll come back together and we'll just discuss them as a group.
This investigation, responses, heart rate, lactate concentration. There's 4 different strokes.
Yeah.
When you said we're using the computers, do you mean we're using SPSS?
You'll use it later, so you don't have to use it here for this part.
Yeah, well, I was just seeing if I needed to have
So
a
is that?
Oh, no, not necessarily.
Or therefore,
I just thought like a general.
Well, I'm still, and were any of those entries based on the evaluation by the normality? He said it was.
Okay, let's talk about these. I know some were more easier than others, or certain questions. It posed some more questions for us to help us differentiate between some things. Raise your hand if you had this physiological responses article. Which groups had that one? About the tennis players. Okay, so in that one, if you didn't have that one, just listen along. Maybe you want to go home and review that one and then go back and listen to this conversation again. But what were their research questions? Anybody from those groups? Go ahead.
To look at physiological responses in tennis drills and.
So they have these different tennis drills that they were performing. Pretty much, where did you typically find the research question or aims of a study? The final paragraph of the introduction is kind of the go-to place. Yeah. Okay, what are the within subjects variables? The what? I can't hear. Strokes per time. So sometimes they had maybe 2 strokes, 7 strokes, 10 strokes. Yes. So what was that called on here? Was that the drills that they had? Uh-huh. Were there any other variables in the study? What were the different points up here? What was first, second, third, fourth, etc.? Okay. Okay, we'll go on. I'll come back to that though. What were there any between subjects variables? No? And that's okay. What is the dependent variable? Mm-hmm. These physiological responses that they have. And there were several of them that they looked at. Heart rate, the different tests that they have. There were quite a few different dependent variables. There's the 4 of them. Okay, so then we keep scrolling down. And what type of design is this study? If the only variable that you caught was the drills where they did 2 hits, 7 hits, 10 hits, etc., then that would be a 1 within. Notice what they call it, a 2-way. So they actually did have that other variable of the first, second, third, up to the 6th point. That was another one. And so next week, when we have a factorial design, that's what it is. When there is multiple independent variables. I agree, didn't do a great job of explaining what the points were, or even describing them in terms of the results and how that variable affected the dependent variable. It pretty much just focused on the drill. So if that's the one that you caught, that's okay. The sample, I'm sure you found that in the article. That wasn't too difficult. And this is the statistical analysis that they did. What assumptions did they look at?
Normality.
Uh-huh. Sphericity, yes. So they talked about Shapiro-Wilkes test to evaluate normality, Mockley's test to evaluate sphericity. I overheard a conversation that when do we talk about assumptions in an article? Do we only talk about them when they're violated? Did they give the results of this? No, they just said that they used it, but then went on with the rest of the paper. So we actually don't know. I mean, it would have taken one sentence to say it passed. P was greater than 0.05. And so that's something I hope that you remember whenever you're writing. It doesn't take much to just confirm that to your readers that yes, you checked it and you knew how to check it. Okay? And then did they report the F values? We didn't see any F values. They just gave a lot of what? P-value, 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 which is okay, but I like to see some F's, some statistics, degrees of freedom, so we can check. You know, if we see degrees of freedom, we can verify, oh yeah, that was the number of groups that they were studying and things like that. So I recommend that, but not everybody does that. So then you could read through the conclusion in those results. Did they do post hoc tests? Yeah, they found significance, did some pairwise post hoc tests. Did they report measures of association, effect size, or power? Nope. So what would you say were the limitations from their perspective and then from your perspective as a reader?
Lack of statistics.
Lack of analysis. It looks like they did a lot of two-way repeated measures. They talked about it, but in their results part, they didn't really explain the results very thoroughly. I agree. Anything else? Overall, how do you evaluate this one? Do what?
It could be stronger with more of a statistical explanation.
Could be a little stronger, yeah. Okay, good. Now, let's see, who has changing learning behaviors? Okay, so this same group here and then the back group. Don't worry, group up here, we'll pull you in a minute. Not gonna get left. Okay, so changing learning behavior, self-efficacy, and goal orientation in PBL groups in higher ed. Okay, so overall, if you were to rate this one before we jump into it, good or not so good?
Better than the last.
Better?
Moderate.
Moderate, okay. Did y'all have this one? Okay.
It's not clear in terms of research design.
Okay, so there's some lack of clarity in a few areas.
Several important things.
Left out some key important things. And don't you wonder, why didn't they put this in there? And there's, I mean, so much explanation in that introduction of the different behaviors, goal orientation, relationships, lots and lots of background, which is good. But then when we need just as much information of this study. Yeah. I like whenever people put their research questions as kind of like a bullet or something like that. It's so easy to find. And in that research question, we can identify independent variables, dependent variables, etc. So in this one, what is the independent variable?
No, the independence. Independence. The independence.
Oh, yeah. Goal orientation.
Okay. What else? What is the within groups or within subjects variables?
Time.
Time. How many time points did they have? If we scroll, let's see, this one. There we go. So they kind of describe it through their specific sentence that I'll refer to is design. A pre-test, post-test, non-equivalent group with 3 repeated measures was used. And what is their dependent variable?
3 main variables. Goal orientation, self-efficacy, and learning behavior.
Okay. So in the question, do self-efficacy, goal orientation, and learning behaviors change over time? So our time is our independent variable, and we're measuring these multiple dependent variables at those 3 time periods. And if so, if that's significant, then post-hoc analysis would tell us, well, in what direction? Yeah.
Well, in their, I'm just like in their abstract, they say like those goal orientation and self-efficacy affect learning or have an impact on learning behavior. And that's why it's confusing. Into a lot of thinking.
Yeah, so in the introduction, the way that they phrase one of those questions, it is confusing. Let's see. So investigate the relationship of self-efficacy and goal orientation on learning behavior. So that's a little different than the way that the research question grouped those 3, and then here it separated them out into different ones, which maybe if you did different types of analyses on those, that would be okay. But there is some confusion there in what are they doing? Maybe if it were a regression or something like that. There is in this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where it came in. So is this a just from the time, and then we have those dependent variables? Would you say this is a one within, a one between? What would you say? One within, yeah. Just we have that one variable of time with 3 levels of week 0, week 4, and 8. Okay, thank you. Okay, so they clearly again say that they do a repeated measures ANOVA. That's the same thing as saying a 1 within or a 2 within type of ANOVA. What do they do in terms of assumptions?
Normality.
Yeah.
They check normality. Yes, let's see, 151. Okay, so here, a good sentence, a repeated measures ANOVA was conducted. Assumptions of sphericity and normality were tested. And a Friedman non-parametric test was run in case the assumption of normality was violated. What do you think that means? How do you interpret that as the reader?
They do their. Go ahead. Okay. I would say that they weren't sure if their test measurement was actually distributed well or taken seriously, and so not valid.
Yeah, this one kind of makes me wonder, a p-value, it's either greater than or less than. I'm not sure where the gray area is there. They don't talk about looking at skewness and kurtosis and things like that. But, saying in terms of statistics that just in case something probably isn't the best way to go about approaching your statistical analysis. So let's kind of steer away from that, but learn from other people's mistakes maybe. And I didn't pick these to pick them apart in the bad part, but it is interesting to see. I mean, these are published in, good journals. So just something to kind of think about. Did they report F values? Yeah, they have. I like this table up here. So they have for each of the dependent variables, they have the degrees of freedom, F, and the p-value. And then in the same one, they have the different pairwise tests comparing A to B, B to C, and A to C, and the corresponding p-values there. So do you think that they adequately addressed the research question? Based on the repeated measures part, there was another section we didn't look at.
Yes.
Yes.
There's a lot of evaluation of how they interact, so
Good.
they at least attempted to answer it.
Good. So what are the high points and the low points? So give me two high points of this article. What did you like about it? It was well organized, okay? What else?
They had clear operational definitions of what they were looking at.
Good. And it's important. I have whenever you wrote repeated measures questions, on a few, I'll pass them back. They weren't for a grade, I just check mark them. But a few of them, I asked the question, okay, your dependent variable is this. How do you define that? How are you going to measure that? Is it with a survey? Is it with an observation or something like that? So clearly defining our variables and how they're measured and things is really important. Okay, so what were the limitations of this one? The drawbacks?
Small sample size.
Ooh, small sample size. How big was it?
77.
77, okay.
And the fact that their reporting measure was written in Dutch, and they had both Dutch and German students.
There you
so
go.
They didn't account for a language barrier or translation.
And that translations alone, if you get into administering surveys and translating it and making sure that in both translations it means the same thing, that is a whole nother challenge in and of itself. But good observation there. Okay, we have one more article to discuss. It is called Not Just Horsing Around: The Impact of Equine Assistant Learning on Levels of Hope and Depression in At-Risk Adolescents. So who had this one? This group and those two. Okay. What are the within subjects variables here? Say it again. Time? What were the time, or how many time points? 6, okay. And what about the dependent variable? The hope scale and the depression scale. Very good. So what kind of design is this study? One within. Very good. So all these were intended to be one within. And what type of analysis did they do? They did do some t-tests. They did the ANOVA, specifically repeated measures ANOVA, and then some non-parametric tests. Good. So how did they do in terms of checking their assumptions? They did check some things. Let me scroll down so we can look at that one together. So here, earlier there were some assumptions, and then specifically here, Mockley's test indicated that the assumption of sphericity had been violated. So they looked at the corrections of the greenhouse, geyser, and when felt. Any other observations there?
Why do they call it the F ratio?
Say that
Why
again.
are they calling it the F ratio in papers?
Because the ANOVA is a F
Right.
equals the ratio of the MS between to the MS within. Yeah, that's really it. And
So we say that.
so how do we know, did they apply one of those modifications?
They say they do that with scrapping.
Notice down here, the very bottom corner, they did use the greenhouse geyser assumption. Even if they didn't state that, where you can always see if a modification was made in F, look at these degrees of freedom. They're decimals. Remember we saw that on the output? When we apply those adjustments, it doesn't change sums of squares or, the actual data. It modifies the degrees of freedom. So if you're ever looking and you see F or even T that has decimals, degrees of freedom, it's not like they have half of a person or half of the group. They just modified them given whatever modification that they did. Yes. Okay, so we do see some F statistics there. Did they adequately address their research questions? Did you think so? Pretty good? Mm-hmm. Overall, how would you rate this study compared to the others? Pretty good? Okay, so 2 things you really like about this one. What is it?
Then that they did the modifications.
They did modifications, and they were pretty clear about that. Mm-hmm. There's no sense in hiding things whenever you're reporting. One other good thing about this one. Say that again.
They looked at, I see effect size measure.
Yeah, one of the only ones that eta squared, effect size. The other ones didn't really report that a whole lot. And so that's just another good measure to include in your statistic. And they report well in their formatting and things like that, I thought. So were there any limitations or drawbacks to this one that you saw?
Yeah, the way they divided the groups also. Well, because they have a table with the age, the number treatment, and the total that they had in each age, and it doesn't look like they had for all of them.
Okay, so maybe their sample, they did have a control group and a treatment group here, and the ages within the treatment and control group. So there might have been some inconsistency. And we looked at repeated measures, which is not treatment versus control. That would be a between group, so another part of the results. But that is something to consider, especially if you're looking at the effects of, this equine therapy specifically on adolescents. Then in your groups, you want a good representation or distribution of your ages in those 2 groups that you're comparing. I'm guessing the effects of early teens, 13, 14 is very different than it might be for 16, 17. There's a lot of difference, in terms of maturity there. And the control group didn't have any. So that could be a drawback there. Yeah. Good. Okay. And that's hard when you do, convenient samples are easy, but they're often difficult in terms of representation. But, that's okay if you include that, and you're just upfront about it. They didn't try to hide it. They reported it and said this is a potential limitation. Maybe if somebody does it again, they could focus more on specific ages that weren't represented or something like that. Yeah. Good. Okay. So is that a good refresher of repeated measures, maybe? Kind of a different side of it, not as the analyst, but as the consumer question.
We had one discussion about, do you need to do a t-test, or can you just incorporate that into the ANOVA? Because the one study looked at ANOVA as well as a t-test for looking at nationality.
So if you just have 2 time points, a t-test and a repeated measures is exactly the same.
So you can just incorporate the nationality into
It's a separate.
If you're incorporating a nationality, that's a different group. So that's going to be a between groups factor that's included. And so we'll talk about in the future a design that does have a between and a within. So we'll hold off on that.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, that was a really good discussion. Thank you for that. So for the rest of the time, there's different things you could work on. Ideally, you would work on that interest, just extra worksheet. But I know that you do have a homework. So whatever is going to best utilize your time. Homework 4 is due Monday. But if you've already done it, there's exercise 4 to give you additional practice. And then there's also in Brightspace that interest RM worksheet with the answers. So any of those 3 things, feel free whenever you're done with any of those, you can leave. I'll stay here though and answer any questions that you might have. Okay? Sounds good.
Scan and email those to you. Do you want a copy? Just